Hawkins rests quietly at night, familiar streets wrapped in soft darkness, as if nothing has ever gone wrong. Yet beneath that calm surface, something else is breathing, slowly, patiently, holding memories that were never healed. This story is not about monsters hiding in the shadows. It is about what happens when pain is left untouched, when fear is sealed away instead of shared. The upside down is not a random mirror world, it is a consequence shaped by what was lost and never reclaimed. Tonight, we'll follow the system behind the danger, the rules of a frozen world, the people who anchor reality, and an ending that never fully closes. If you enjoy these journeys, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me where you're listening from, what time it is, and the topics you'd love to explore. Your thoughts may guide our next adventure. The danger facing Hawkins does not arrive as a sudden invasion. It grows slowly, shaped by thought, memory, and a particular way of seeing the world. At its center is not simply a villain, but a system, a mindset that has been given the power to organize reality itself. This force did not begin as something monstrous. It began as a human perspective that learned to see people as flawed patterns rather than living beings. Society, in this view, is artificial. Connection is a weakness. Emotion is a defect that clouds clarity. And when such a belief is granted extraordinary power, it does not destroy randomly, it rearranges. The transformation from human to governing presence marks a shift from individuality to architecture. What was once a single mind becomes a framework capable of operating an entire dimension, not ruling through chaos, but through order. An order stripped of empathy, built on the belief that the world would function better if feeling were removed from it entirely. This is where the upside down takes its true form. It is not born complete, and it does not exist as a finished realm waiting to be discovered. Instead, it is shaped pressed into existence by a convergence of inner states. Fear that does not yet understand itself. Hatred that has learned exactly what it wants. One side provides structure, a rigid will, precise and deliberate. The other provides form, raw memory, unprocessed emotion, and moments frozen at the instant innocence broke. Together, they create a space that feels familiar, yet profoundly wrong. The upside down reflects Hawkins not as it is, but as it was remembered at a moment of rupture. A town captured in a single breath of fear. Its streets, buildings and rooms exist as imprints, less like places, more like preserved thoughts. This is not coincidence. And remember to check for minute milk away. And remember to check for minute milk away. It is design. Within this system, memory becomes material. Unhealed moments gain weight. Regret hardens into structure. Pain that is never named begins to occupy space. Here, suffering does not disappear with time. It settles. It accumulates. It accumulates, and eventually, it seeks somewhere to live. The greatest illusion is the idea that Hawkins was attacked. The truth is quieter. Hawkins opened itself. And every silence left unbroken, every emotion buried instead of shared, widened the cracks. The upside down did not force its way in. It answered an invitation written slowly, unconsciously, over years. This is the core philosophy of the threat, that pain, when ignored, organizes itself. That memory, when denied release, becomes architecture, pure, and that a world does not fall because it is weak, but because it refuses to listen to what it is already holding. In this story, the enemy is not outside the town. It is the system that forms when trauma is allowed to govern unchecked. And once such a system is built, it does not simply vanish. It waits and waits. The Upside Down is not a world that was built with intention. It was not planned, designed, or grown over time. Instead, it exists as a replica, formed in a single instant, a copy of Hawkins taken at the exact moment when something fragile broke. This place did not develop the way living worlds do. It did not learn, adapt, or move forward. It was simply left as it was, and time never returned to claim it. Every road lies where it should be. Every house stands in the correct position. Rooms are shaped exactly as they once were, down to the smallest detail, but nothing inside them breathes. And the geometry is right. The layout is familiar, yet the air feels empty, as if the idea of life was removed after the copy was made. There are no signs of growth here, no repairs, no decay that leads to renewal. Walls do not get repainted. Windows are never replaced. Broken things remain broken, not because they were destroyed, but because nothing ever came to fix them. This world does not experience aging, for it experiences preservation. Like a photograph, it captures a moment perfectly, but a photograph does not change when years pass. It does not learn what came next. It does not know what was lost afterward. The Upside Down holds Hawkins the way memory often does, accurate, selective, and incomplete. It remembers the shape of things, but not their purpose. A school exists, but learning does not. A home stands intact, but warmth does not linger. Streets stretch forward, yet no one is ever truly arriving. Nothing new is born here. We'll uncover how we will. Nothing old is allowed to fade completely. The future was never copied, so it cannot exist. This is why the Upside Down feels unfinished, not because it was interrupted, but because it was never meant to continue. It is a world paused at the instant of trauma, where time did not stop out of mercy, but because there was nowhere left for it to go. In this frozen reflection, decay does not lead to transformation. It only deepens, surfaces darken, structures sag, not from use or neglect, but from endless stillness. The Upside Down is not dying. It is being slowly forgotten. And yet, forgotten things have a way of lingering. Like a photograph left in the dark for too long, the image does not disappear. It stains, details blur, edges soften, and the longer it remains untouched, the more it begins to feel heavier than it ever was in life. This is not a parallel world moving alongside Hawkins. It is a memory that never learned how to let go. A single moment, copied perfectly, then abandoned. And in that abandonment, it learned how to wait. One time in the Upside Down does not behave the way we expect it to. It does not flow. It does not pass. It does not carry moments away and replace them with new ones. Instead, time here is locked, sealed to the exact day when Hawkins first tore open. That moment became an anchor. Everything after it was never allowed to arrive. There is no sense of tomorrow in this world, no quiet anticipation of the next week, no slow understanding that comes with growing older. Nothing matures. Nothing reaches an ending or a beginning. The Upside Down exists in a perpetual present that is not truly present at all. It is a loop without movement, a still frame mistaken for duration. When something seems to change here, it is only an echo, a repetition of a repetition, a response triggered by what already happened. Footsteps do not lead forward, they circle back. Sounds do not travel outward, they return to their source. Motion exists, but progress does not. This is not living time. It is remembered time. In the world we know, time heals by moving on. Moments are softened as they are replaced. Pain becomes distant as new experiences take its place. But the upside down has no such mechanism. Here, nothing is replaced, so nothing is healed. The day the rift opened is not a point in history. It is the only chapter this world knows how to read. Every street, every building, every shadow is locked into that single reference point. Not because time chose to stop, but because it was never taught how to continue. This creates a strange stillness. A silence that feels heavy, not calm. A sense that the world is waiting, but not for the future. It is waiting for recognition. The upside down does not ask, what happens next? That question belongs to living worlds. Worlds that believe in possibility. Instead, this place whispers a different question over and over again. Do you remember? It remembers everything that happened up to the moment of fracture. It remembers fear before it learned how to speak. It remembers confusion before it had a name. And because it remembers so clearly, it cannot imagine anything beyond that memory. This is why the upside down feels trapped, not by walls or distance, but by narrative. Its story ended before it began. And yet, time here is not entirely inert. It reacts. It responds to intrusion. It vibrates when touched by the living. But even these reactions are not steps forward. They are reflexes, automatic responses to stimulus, like a muscle twitching long after the mind has gone quiet. The world does not evolve. It replays. A living world dreams of the future. The upside down dreams of the past. And in that endless rehearsal of what has already happened, time does not pass. It stays. The upside down does not mirror Hawkins as it is today. It does not track new streets, new faces, or changing lives. Instead, it reflects something far less visible and far more persistent. It reflects what was never released. This world is shaped not by current events, but by emotional residue, fear that never found words, moments that were endured but never processed, pain that was survived yet quietly sealed away. Where Hawkins moves on, the upside down stays behind. Every structure here exists as a trace, not a function. A school does not represent learning. It represents anxiety. A home does not represent safety. It represents what safety once meant before it failed. Objects are not tools. They are imprints. In this place, matter behaves like memory. Walls hold tension. Rooms preserve silence. Empty spaces feel crowded, not with bodies, but with feeling. Nothing here asks to be used. Everything asks to be remembered. The upside down does not live because living requires change. It does not grow because growth requires release. And it does not decay into renewal because renewal requires forgetting. Instead, it remembers. When a memory fades in Hawkins, when a person tells themselves that something is over, when a loss is buried under routine, when fear is hidden behind normalcy, that memory does not disappear. It relocates. The upside down becomes its container. This is the unspoken law governing the world. What is forgotten above is preserved below, not gently, not kindly, but precisely. That precision is what keeps the upside down intact. It is not alive, yet it does not die. It is not evolving, yet it does not collapse. It is sustained by accumulation, the slow layering of unresolved moments. This is why the world feels heavy, even when nothing moves. Why silence there feels louder than noise. Why familiar places inspire unease instead of comfort, and the upside down is crowded with memories that no longer belong anywhere else. In Hawkins, forgetting is often mistaken for healing. Time passes, life continues. People learn how to function again, but forgetting is not the same as letting go. The upside down exposes that difference. It remembers what people choose not to carry anymore, and by remembering, it prevents closure. This is the paradox of the world. Its strength comes from stasis, because it never changes, it never loses anything, because it never lives, it never finishes dying. It exists in a suspended state not as a rival reality, but as an archive of emotional weight. A living world depends on balance, remembering enough to learn, forgetting enough to continue. The upside down has no such balance. It only remembers, and memory without release becomes pressure. That pressure pushes outward. It strains the boundary between worlds. It searches for resonance, people whose inner state matches the frequency of what is stored below. This is why the upside down feels responsive to certain individuals, not because it chooses them, but because they already carry what the world contains. Fear recognizes fear. Unspoken pain recognizes itself. The upside down does not hunt. It reflects. It does not grow stronger by force, for it grows heavier by retention. And this is what condemns it. Because a world that only remembers can never truly live, but it also cannot fully disappear. It lingers, and lingers på av weither ej. Good mycket efter, holding what was left behind, waiting for someone, somewhere, to finally remember enough or not to let go. The hive mind does not behave like a living species. It does not eat, rest, reproduce, or evolve the way natural organisms do. Instead, it functions as something closer to a collective operating system, a framework designed to coordinate thought, movement, and intent across an entire ecosystem. There is no individuality within this structure. No creature within the hive mind acts for its own survival or desire. Personal instinct does not exist here. What exists instead is instruction. Every action begins as a directive. Every movement is the execution of a larger command. The creatures that appear to inhabit the upside down are not independent beings, but interfaces, points through which intention is carried out. Because of this, emotion never arises on its own. There is no fear when something is threatened, no hesitation when a path is blocked, no regret when a loss occurs. These responses belong to organisms that experience time as a personal journey. The hive mind does not. Its reactions are calculated. Stimulus enters the system. A response is generated. Efficiency is measured. The outcome is adjusted. Nothing is felt. Everything is processed. And this makes the hive mind extraordinarily stable. Without emotion, there is no internal conflict. Without individuality, there is no disagreement. Every component moves in alignment, not because it agrees, but because agreement is not a concept that applies. The hive mind exists as a network of awareness, not a body. It does not depend on any single physical form to survive. Creatures can be damaged, removed, or destroyed without threatening the system itself. What matters is not the body, but the connection. As long as the signal continues to travel, the system remains intact. This is why the Upside Down feels unified in its response to intrusion. Why disturbances in one area ripple outward instantly. Why the environment itself seems to react as if the world were aware. It is aware, but not in the way humans understand awareness. The hive mind does not observe, it monitors, and it does not decide. Forget towards it war. It executes, and it does not imagine alternatives, but it optimizes for the objective it has been given. This makes the system powerful, but also rigid. Because it lacks emotion, it lacks intuition. Because it lacks intuition, it cannot truly adapt. It can only refine existing patterns. The hive mind cannot wonder, it cannot doubt. It cannot question whether its goal should exist at all. It only knows how to continue. This is why it requires continuous connection. Disruption does not confuse it, it disconnects it. And when connection weakens, coordination falters. Responses slow, with patterns fragment. The hive mind does not panic when this happens. Panic would imply fear of loss. Instead, it simply becomes less precise. So, like a machine losing signal strength, it continues to function, but with diminishing clarity. In this way, the hive mind reveals its true nature. It is not alive in the emotional sense. It is active, a system built to carry intent across space, without ever needing to understand the cost. And as long as that intent remains uninterrupted, the system will persist, not because it wants to survive, but because survival is built into its design. The creatures of the Upside Down are not individuals in any meaningful sense. They do not carry names that belong to them alone. They do not possess personal histories, memories, or identities. And they do not make choices. What appears as life is, in truth, function. And each creature exists as an extension, a limb reaching outward from a distant center. Some serve as hands, interacting directly with the environment. Others act as eyes, observing and transmitting information back through the network. Still others function as sensory instruments, measuring threat, proximity, or opportunity. None of these roles are chosen. They are assigned. This is why destruction carries no weight here. When a creature is removed, the system does not mourn. There is no recalculation of loss in emotional terms. No sense of absence. From the perspective of the central will, nothing meaningful has been taken away. Only a tool has stopped functioning. The hierarchy that governs this ecosystem is strict and unambiguous. At the highest level exists intent, a singular will that defines purpose and direction. This will does not engage with the physical world directly. It does not need to. Below it operates the hive mind, a distribution network designed to translate intent into instruction. Commands are broken down, prioritized, and routed efficiently through the system. At the lowest level are the creatures themselves. They execute. There is no feedback loop of opinion. no room for interpretation. Orders are not questioned because the concept of questioning does not exist. This structure creates an ecosystem that is extraordinarily efficient. Movements are synchronized. Responses are immediate. Coordination emerges without communication delays. The system does not waste energy on uncertainty. Yet this same efficiency creates a fundamental limitation. Without individuality, there is no improvisation. Without personal stakes, there is no creativity. Creatures cannot adapt outside their assigned functions because adaptation requires decision-making beyond instruction. When conditions change in unexpected ways, the system responds by refining existing behaviors, not inventing new ones. This makes the ecosystem stable but brittle. It performs flawlessly within the parameters it understands. Outside those parameters, it struggles. The creatures cannot act independently if cut off from the hive mind. Separated from the network, they do not become wild or unpredictable, and they become empty. Motion may continue for a moment, driven by residual instruction, but purpose fades quickly without connection. In this way, the creatures reveal their true nature. They are not inhabitants of the world. They are interfaces through which the world acts. They do not explore. They do not learn. They do not fear extinction. They simply perform the role they were created to fill. The Upside Down feels alive because these creatures move, but life in its fullest sense requires choice. Here, there is none, only execution. And while this makes the ecosystem powerful, it also ensures that when the central falters, every limb attached to it will follow, not in rebellion, but in silence. The strength of the Upside Down's ecosystem comes from its unity. Everything moves as one. Every response is aligned with a single purpose. But this same unity conceals a vulnerability woven into the system's design. The entire structure depends on one source of will, one point of coordination, one origin from which intent flows outward. There is no redundancy here, no secondary authority, no independent centers capable of sustaining the system if the primary node fails. As long as the connection remains intact, the ecosystem operates with remarkable efficiency. Creatures respond instantly. Movement is precise. The environment itself seems to cooperate, as if guided by an invisible hand. But when that connection is disrupted, the effects are immediate. Creatures do not turn feral or unpredictable. They become slower. Their movements lose precision. Responses arrive late, or not at all. Coordination dissolves. Without continuous input, the hive mind cannot recalculate effectively. Signals fragment. Patterns fall out of sync. And det betydeligt steg hållet von kolm. Till en tiken type doesn't show on sea. To rock, man hope you way. What once acted as a single organism becomes a collection of disconnected parts. This system does not know how to adapt independently. Adaptation requires experimentation. Experimentation requires failure, and failure requires a tolerance for uncertainty. The hive mind has none of these. It can refine known behaviors, but it cannot invent new ones. It can optimize existing patterns, but it cannot abandon them. Everything it does is bound by the limits of its original design. As power becomes more concentrated, performance increases. Decisions are faster. Coordination improves. Inefficiency is eliminated. But concentration carries a cost. The more centralized the system becomes, the more fragile it grows. Every function relies on the uninterrupted presence of the central node. Every creature, every response, every reaction assumes that connection will never break. When the central will weakens or disappears, the system does not transform. It does not evolve into something new. It does not redistribute authority. It collapses. The hive mind does not possess the capacity for rebirth. There is no mechanism for succession, no protocol for decentralization. Once the node is gone, there is nothing left to coordinate the network. The ecosystem does not continue in a diminished form. It disintegrates. This is the paradox at the heart of the Upside Down. Its greatest strength, absolute unity, is also its greatest flaw. A living ecosystem survives through diversity, redundancy, and disagreement. It allows parts to fail while the whole endures. The Upside Down allows no such variation. It demands perfect alignment, and perfect alignment leaves no room for recovery. The system was never designed to live without its center. It was designed to serve it. So when that center is removed, the hive mind does not mourn. It does not rage. It simply ceases to function, not with violence, not with chaos, but with silence, a silence that spreads outward until the network that once felt eternal becomes a collection of disconnected echoes, unable to move, unable to adapt, and unable to continue. The Upside Down does not arrive in Hawkins as an army. It does not march through streets or tear down walls by force. There is no moment of open conquest, no clear beginning of occupation. Instead, it seeps in. It enters quietly, through spaces that were already hollow, through silences left too long unbroken, through feelings that had nowhere else to go. This world does not replace Hawkins geographically. It replaces something far more subtle, not streets or buildings, but the inner landscape of the people who live there. The erosion does not begin in the ground beneath their feet. It begins in the mind. The Upside Down grows strongest where sadness lingers without language, where grief stretches across years, never fully acknowledged, where someone feels unseen, unheard, and slowly convinces themselves that this is normal. These emotional absences create openings, not dramatic ruptures, but small fractures, the kind that form when connection fades, one conversation at a time, when pain is managed instead of shared, when survival replaces understanding. The world below does not need permission to enter these spaces. They are already open. It feeds on prolonged sorrow, on the quiet belief that no one would understand anyway, on thoughts pushed down repeatedly until they become part of the background. The Upside Down does not seek out the strongest pain. It responds to the most contained pain. Feelings expressed tend to soften. Feelings hidden tend to deepen. And as they deepen, they resonate. Hawkins, from the outside, continues to function. People go to school. They go to work. They smile, speak, and move through routines. But beneath that surface, something weakens. Not because the town is attacked, but because it begins to lose cohesion from within. The sense of shared reality thins. People stop truly seeing one another. Isolation becomes easier than honesty. This is how the Upside Down advances. Not by breaking doors open, but by stepping through doors that were never closed. It does not impose itself on the town. It reflects what the town has already become in fragments. Every unspoken emotion adds weight to the space below. Every unresolved moment gives the world beneath Hawkins more clarity, more presence. Eventually, the boundary between inner and outer landscapes weakens, not because Hawkins is powerless, but because it has learned to endure instead of heal. The greatest misconception is that the town was overtaken. It was not. Hawkins was never conquered. It hollowed itself out, slowly, quietly, over time. The upside down simply moved into what was left behind. This is why it feels intimate rather than foreign, why it knows where to press, why it responds so precisely to certain individuals. It does not arrive as something new. It arrives as something recognizable, a world formed from what was carried alone for too long, a place shaped by the cost of silence. And once it settles in, it does not need to push further. It waits. It waits. Because a town does not fall when it is attacked. It falls when it forgets how to hold itself together. The upside down does not feed on bodies. It has no interest in flesh, strength, or physical endurance. What sustains it is far quieter and far more abundant. It feeds on what is carried inward, into unspoken guilt, might, regret that was never shared, the persistent feeling of being alone even when surrounded by others. These emotions do not disappear when they are ignored. They compress, and compression creates pressure. In the upside down, pressure becomes power. This world responds not to pain itself, but to containment. A wound that is acknowledged begins to loosen. A feeling that is shared loses its density. But emotions kept hidden do the opposite. They settle deeper. They bind tighter. They leave clearer imprints. The more carefully something is concealed, the more distinctly the upside down can sense it. This is why connection matters so much. Isolation does not mean the absence of people. It means the absence of being truly seen. A person can laugh, speak, and function normally, and still feel entirely alone within their own thoughts. The upside down recognizes that state immediately. It does not target weakness. It responds to disconnection. Those who are reached by the world below are not fragile by nature. They are often resilient, thoughtful, and capable. What makes them vulnerable is not their inability to endure pain, but their belief that they must endure it alone. This belief creates resonance. Guilt that has no outlet grows heavier. Regret that is never voiced sharpens. Loneliness that goes unacknowledged becomes a steady signal. The upside down does not amplify these emotions, and it matches them. When a person's inner state aligns closely enough with what the world below contains, the boundary thins. The world reacts most strongly when pain remains unnamed, when no language is given to what hurts, when no witness is present to share the weight. Listening disrupts this process, and so does honesty. A feeling spoken aloud changes shape. Now, a regret acknowledged becomes part of the past. A moment of shared understanding weakens the hold of isolation. But silence preserves energy. And this is why the upside down grows in places where people stop talking about what matters, where survival replaces expression, where being fine becomes the default answer. The system below thrives on emotional efficiency. It draws power from states that require no maintenance, feelings that are self-contained and self-sustaining. Unresolved guilt loops endlessly. Unshared regret replays without interruption, and loneliness feeds itself. In this way, the upside down operates like a mirror that only reflects inward. The more someone turns away from others, the more clearly the world below can see them. It is not cruelty, it is correspondence. The upside down does not punish people for feeling pain. It responds when pain is carried without connection. That is its fuel, and that is why its influence feels so personal and so precise and so difficult to escape, because the strongest energy it draws from is not suffering itself, but the belief that suffering must be faced alone. The gateway between worlds does not open through ritual or force. There are no words spoken, no symbols drawn, no deliberate act of invitation. The boundary weakens in a far quieter way. It opens when people stop telling the truth to one another, when conversations become careful instead of honest, when feelings are filtered to avoid discomfort, when silence feels safer than vulnerability. This is how separation begins, and the deaf to one, the see eel. Friendships do not collapse all at once. They thin gradually, missed moments, unspoken tensions, distance disguised as normal change. What once felt instinctive becomes effort. What once felt shared becomes private. Families, too, can lose their sense of safety, not through obvious harm, but through absence. And when support becomes conditional, when listening is replaced by expectation, when being understood feels less likely than being judged. In these spaces, connection weakens, and where connection weakens, the world below grows closer. Pain behaves differently when it is shared. Spoken aloud, it loses some of its grip. Acknowledged, it begins to move instead of settling. Even when it remains unresolved, it becomes lighter when someone else is present with it. But pain, held alone, changes shape. Unshared sorrow becomes heavier with time. Unspoken fear tightens inward. But a single moment, replayed without interruption, begins to anchor itself. This is how the gateway forms, not as an opening in space, but as a fixed point in the inner world. The upside down does not create this anchor. It recognizes it. It does not search for victims. It waits for alignment. When a person slowly withdraws from their surroundings, when reality feels distant, unreliable, or unsafe, the boundary between inner experience and external world thins. The upside down responds to that thinning. It does not pull people away from reality. It allows reality to lose its hold. This is why resistance does not come from strength alone. It comes from connection. Honesty interrupts the process. Listening disrupts it. Its presence weakens the pull. A single shared moment can loosen an anchor that has been forming for years. A truth spoken at the right time can close a fracture before it deepens. But when disconnection becomes routine, when isolation is normalized, and when people adapt to carrying everything themselves, the door does not need to be forced. It is already open. The upside down does not rush through this opening. If you were hope, it does not need to. Time is on its side. It waits patiently at the edge of attention until separation feels complete, until a person feels more alone within reality than outside it. That is when the pull becomes strongest, not because the world below is powerful, but because the world above has stopped holding on. This is the final law of opening. The boundary does not fail when reality is attacked. It fails when reality is abandoned, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, until what once felt solid, it becomes distant enough to let something else step in. Reconnect you and Nate. In this world, survival does not depend on strength alone. It depends on anchors, people whose presence keeps reality from drifting too far from itself. At the center stands the one often mistaken for a weapon, but this figure was never meant to destroy. Their ability is not an instrument of attack, but a balancing response, something the world produced to counter what was pulling it apart. Their power moves with the state of their mind. When fear tightens, it fractures outward. When calm settles in, the world steadies with it. The book, control is not learned to win battles, and it is learned to prevent further damage. Every step toward mastery carries weight, because misuse does not only harm an enemy, it widens the cracks already present. So restraint becomes its own form of courage. Not acting becomes as important as acting, and growth is measured not by force, but by responsibility. Nearby, quieter but just as vital, is the one who crossed the boundary and returned. They are not fully separate from the other side. Something remains threaded through them, through a lingering signal, faint but persistent. They sense shifts before anyone else does. They feel disturbances, not as thoughts, but as changes in air, mood, rhythm. This makes them a living warning system, a biological radar, tuned to frequencies no one else can hear. But this connection carries risk. What allows them to detect danger and what also makes them vulnerable to influence. They are both early alert and potential entry point, and were and if ever pets of towers whelpets, a reminder that proximity to the threat never comes without cost. Their existence proves that survival does not always mean escape. Sometimes it means carrying the echo forward. And where around them stand others, friends, protectors, witnesses, people without extraordinary abilities, yet essential all the same. They are the ones who hold the line quietly, who choose to stay when leaving would be easier, who speak when silence would be safer, and some of them do not remain. Loss in this world is never random. It does not arrive to shock, but to mark transition. Each sacrifice seals the end of a phase, a moment when innocence gives way to understanding, when belief in easy outcomes finally dissolves. These losses do not exist to justify the conflict. They exist to remind the survivors what is at stake. With every absence, the world grows heavier, but also clearer. What remains becomes more deliberate, more aware. Together, these characters form a network of anchors, not holding reality in place by force, but by presence, connection, and choice. They do not close the cracks entirely. They keep them from widening. As you rest with this thought, allow it to settle slowly. Not every protector looks powerful. Not every victory looks like triumph. Pure fantasy Sturov into my king comes to become three, sometimes holding the world together. Wilde Fairbird ever your own peaths Boraku means learning when not to pull it apart any further. Breathe gently, let the image soften. The anchors are still there, and for now, they are enough. In the end, the boundary does not shatter, it fades. Crisis blurs the line between worlds until familiar places no longer feel entirely safe. Then, The fragments come together, not to achieve a perfect victory, but to endure what must be faced. The final struggle leaves no clean triumph, only survival shaped by loss. Years later, Hawkins still stands. Streets remain, walls remain, life continues, changed, quieter. The upside down closes its door, but memory does not follow, because this story never asked how evil is destroyed. It asks what happens when pain is held too long. Hawkins is still here, and somewhere beyond it, the other world may be sleeping, waiting, softly, to be remembered.